Namaskar. Namaskar and welcome once again to the Eikam series on Gita on the Go. The last time that we were here and we spoke to you, we actually discussed chapters 1 to 6 and then presented the summary of the first 6 chapters of the Bhagwad Gita. If you remember, when we had first spoken to you right in the beginning, we spoke to you about the structure of the Bhagwad Gita and how it is actually divided into 3 parts. There is the Mahavakya of Tat Tvam Asi. And as we had spoken to you earlier, and we discussed how chapters 1 to 6 are about Tvam, about you, about me, about us, and about understanding the self. What makes us, our drivers, our motivations, our thoughts, our insecurities, our feelings. And we studied them in the context of Arjun on the battlefield and how we are all just Arjuns on the battlefield, fighting for our own existence and resolving our inner conflicts with every breath we take. Well, with that segment of the Bhagavad Gita over, and after having understood Tvam and the self and us and you, it is here that we step into chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita. Over chapters 7 to 12, we will discuss Tat, the nature of Tat, the entire cosmos, the universe, its operating principles, how it's structured. And towards the end of this phase of chapters 7 to 12, we will also discuss our relationship with the cosmos, with the Tat, and therefore step into the third and the final phase from chapter 13 to chapter 18, which will be about how we become the cosmos and engage with it, the Asi part of Tat Tvam Asi. With that, we welcome you back into the Eikam series on Gita on the Go. And as we step into chapter 7, which is the Jnana Vijnana Yoga, literally translated, that is information and wisdom, knowledge and wisdom of the nature of the cosmos and the universe. An absolute privilege that I welcome Samir back with us on the show. Welcome back, Samir.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Tat is a very interesting word. I'm sure even when we write it in English, we say T-A-T possibly. And isn't it very similar to that?
Yes.
And the reason is that our rishis didn't even have a word for it. So they just called it that. That. And they said, you, Tvam, are that. So now what is that?
Yes.
That word that. I mean, what is that? That.
And more importantly, Samir, if there is a that, then is there a this?
So yes. So is there a this? Is there a that? Or is everything that? And that is this discussion that Arjun has moved into. You remember Arjun in chapter 1, right? His crying, his understanding of his own emotional weakness. In chapter 2, beginning of chapter 2, he gives up his smaller ego, surrenders to a teacher. That's where the journey started. And now he started getting involved into the philosophical aspects of this entire discussion. And Sri Krishna introduces this entire material world in a very beautiful way. He says this material world has basically 2 parts. What you see and what you don't see. Or what you experience and what you in your limited self don't experience at all. And he says what you experience has 8 components.
Okay.
He uses the word Ashtadha, 8. What are these 8? He says the 5 elements, right? The Kshiti, Ap, Marut, Tej, Vyom, all the 5 great elements. And then he brings in the Antakarana. This is where there's a slight twist, because we experience the material world only through what is physical. But he says your manas, the mind, the emotional part of our mind, the intellect, the buddhi, and my small I, the small I that I carry all around, my ahankara. These 8 comprise this entire material world. Now, here's the twist. He says, this material world is nothing but a part of my energy. He says it's my lower energy, but it is me. It is my energy which has manifested into this 8.
Samir, as you're talking about the 5 elements, which we are now introducing for the first time in the context of Tat, the 3 elements that make me up, my body, my manas, my mind, my intellect, my thoughts, which we've covered in Tvam,
Correct.
and how that little ahankar, that little me, the I that I bring into the ecosystem, I'm actually reminded of this concept of the Tehutian principles of ancient Egypt, which is where I think Ritas either derive from, or the metaphysical principles that make up the cosmos, where the first principle is actually the principle of mentalism. All universe is mental. It's in the mind. So what happens in my mind is the universe, and what happens in the universe exists in my mind. And I hadn't quite understood it when I read it for the first time. But now if the Bhagwad Gita says so as well, and Bhagwan Sri Krishna says so as well, then I am very curious to understand this engagement, because I have always believed, or we have always been led to believe, that there's a universe that's outside of us. The sun will rise in the east and set in the west. But if that is also a function of my engagement and my mind, how does that work? What does Bhagwanji have to say?
So very nice, because you use the concept of saying the sun rises in the east. Does the sun actually rise? It rises in my mind, right?
I see it
I
rise.
see it rising, right? And if my perceptions, which are colored by what? By my baggage called my manas and my buddhi and my all the ahankar that I carry. Now, if that is this entire projection, what does Krishna say? Krishna says, it's such a powerful statement he makes. He says, I am in them. He declares. It's a roar, you know. He says, I am in them, but they are not in me. Now, somehow that becomes a little confusing. So let me try and explain this with a very beautiful analogy. So if you look at the screen and you see that Spider-Man there, and what does he do? He jumps around from building to building, right? And you have the children clapping for him. You're also engaged. And suddenly there's the interval, the screen changes. You have an advertisement coming on. What happened to the screen? Think about that. What would be your answer?
The screen is still very much there.
Just the screen.
Yeah.
It didn't change.
It has no existence.
It
didn't change.
Yeah, it didn't change. It existed all the time. Would Spider-Man have existed without the screen?
No.
So that's what he says. I am in all those 8. I am part of the Panchatattva. I am part of that manas. I am in the buddhi. I am the ahankar. But without me, you have no existence. You in that small I,
Yes.
that has no existence. Because just exactly like in the movie, or the movie screen that we are looking at, the screen is unchanging.
So therefore everything that I see, transact, engage with, the universe as I imagine it, is literally just that. It is a figment of my experience, my baggage, and my imagination. And if that be the case, the way I engage or perceive the universe, my relationships, people, whatever it is therefore a function of the nature of my existence.
Yes, as long as you believe it to be true and you completely engage with it, it's very real. But just imagine, think of that as a bulb, and that helps bulbs glowing, right? What makes that bulb glow? Electricity.
The amount of electricity, the
Right?
nature of
Right.
the
Now,
covering.
if we take away the electricity, what happens to the bulb? It's inert.
It's a screen.
It's a screen. It's just there,
Yes.
right? It can do nothing.
Yes.
It becomes inert.
Yes.
Exactly the same way, when the life force, consciousness,
Yes.
whatever we want to call it,
Yes.
I'll call it Tat.
Okay.
And if that Tat does not engage with these 8 things that we talked about, what happens? They just are inert. They have no existence in themselves. Right? How do we apply this in our day-to-day life? Are there occasions when you've got angry?
Oh yeah,
That's
all the time.
That's
I'm the angry
right?
young woman.
Right. Now let's just say when you get angry and you distance yourself from that emotion and you say, I am in that anger, the anger is not in me. What will happen to that anger?
I've dissipated it.
Finished.
I finished it.
Isn't this such a beautiful way to understand one's own emotions and learn how to manage them? Not control them, how to manage them?
You know, Samir, this is actually also taking me back to that conversation when we were having of saying I am angry versus I'm feeling angry. That was the
Yes.
first step we had done
Yes.
when we were doing
Correct.
Tvam.
Correct.
And now that we are in Tat, we are just expanding it further
Perfect.
to say I am in that anger. That anger
It
is not
in me.
So how beautiful is that?
And now do you see one beautiful thing here? What we talked about in the microcosm, at the macrocosmic level, is nothing but just a mere expansion of that as a whole thought.
That's taking a huge leap.
Yes, but isn't that a natural, logical leap?
That would mean, Samir, that you and I and all of us who are seeing and listening to this, then we are all the same people. What makes you you and what makes me me, and how do these 8 elements manifest?
So these 8 elements, very nice question. These 8 elements, they manifest because of some very interesting concept called the 3 gunas.
Okay.
Krishna did not introduce the gunas very much in detail. He did tell Arjun way back in chapter 2, Nistraigunya Bhava, etc., across the 3 gunas without explaining them. Even here he is not explaining them so much, but he says that these 8 with the permutations and combinations of all the gunas manifest in this world. And when they manifest in this world, some of these elements will be predominantly tamasic, some will be predominantly rajasic, some will be predominantly sattvic, but the whole combination of all these 3 with these 8, that's a huge number of permutations, is what this entire universe is. So if you look at the warp and the weft, then on one side you have the 8, the other side you have the 3, and how they weave together is how you create these beautiful patterns on the saris that you wear.
I'm still trying to absorb this. But so, what we have thus far understood in material physics and in quantum physics and in the principles of metaphysics as the space-time weft, and we spoke about it earlier also, it's actually the tapestry is literally the tapestry of these 8 elements interweaving with 3 gunas.
Perfect.
And therefore, Samir, you are one combination of, or some combination of these 8 and those 3, and I am some combination of that. And in fact, so everything, whether it's, again, I'm going back to science because we understand it, but whether we classify something as living or non-living or matter or energy or whatever it is, everything that is materially present, like you said, visible, invisible, experienced, unexperienced, mahat or not, all of that is basically some manifestation of these 8 and the 3 guna.
Absolutely right.
So I understand it till the 5 elements and the gunas. Maybe I'm struggling a bit to understand it from the manas, the buddhi, the aham, and the engagement of the 3 gunas, because I somehow always thought that it was the body, the mind, the intellect that made the gunas and not the other way around. And maybe that's my limited understanding. How does that play out in something that is not obviously, that doesn't obviously have a consciousness? Or you're saying everything has a consciousness?
So that's very interesting. When we look at the Advaitic philosophy, you basically say that everything, this whole thing that you described a little while back, everything has consciousness. It's just that the degrees of manifested consciousness is lower or higher.
So their sentience may vary,
Correct?
but they're all some level of consciousness. E is equal to mc square. There is
Right.
some level of energy and some level of matter.
And what lies behind that? The screen that we talked about, right? Behind all of these manifestations, what lies behind it? That inherent consciousness is there across everything that you are seeing.
You know, Samir, I'm just hoping that this is chapter 7, which should be the first chapter of Tat. As we go through 8 to 12, and I'm guessing we'll be discussing more and more of this, it gets, right now, it really sounds like a huge leap. It sounds too much to take in. But I'm hoping as we go along, Bhagwan Sri Krishna will make me feel less less non-understanding and a little more intelligent. Samir, all of this really sounds too much to take in and absorb. So far, my entire universe has been limited to I, me, myself, at best me, mine, and those that are around me. How do I make sense of this Tat? Will I be able to?
So you are in the same boat as I am, and so was Arjun. So Krishna had to explain that and said, I understand this is a big leap I'm making for you to take over. However, let me make it very clear. There are 4 types of people who will not make this leap.
He is brutal, isn't he?
Very, very. So one, he says, those who are ignorant. They live in their bliss. What do we say? Ignorance is bliss. They live in the bliss that this material world is the be-all and end-all of everything that we are doing. Right?
Is this also what translates into the darshans, and when we come to it?
Yes, one of it,
yes,
which is Charvak's
which is the
darshan.
Charvak, yes.
And where he says, Rinam Kritva Ghritam Jivet, Yavat Jivet, Sukham Jivet. Right? So that is the ignorant. Then he says there are people who may have an inkling of something could be better, but they are lazy. Right? And they just don't want to move.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. Yes.
Yeah. The third is a group of people who are deluded, right? And they are entrapped by the material trappings that they have encompassed around them. But the fourth, he uses a very harsh word, asuric. I would call that, translate that as egoistic, whose ego cannot die. Let's take an example from our Purans or from Itihas. Let's take Ravan. Look at the degree of tapasya that Ravan did.
Yes.
To the extent that he mutilated his own body,
yes,
kept cutting off one head at a time, tossing it into the fire, made Shiva manifest, forced Shiva to manifest. I mean, if Shiva came in front of me, I would say, give me liberation.
I would just surrender.
Right?
Dissolve.
But he said, give me dominion, give me strength. Because the ego had not died.
In which case, Samir, it's not the little eye, no? It's a big eye.
Yeah, right. However big that eye holds on, it is that small eye.
Yeah.
So, but see, Sri Krishna's message is of hope, right? So he also gives us 4 people or 4 types of people who will make that jump. Number 1, he says, those who are in trouble. Now, it's about not just those who are in trouble, but those who are in trouble and understand that they can't overcome this trouble on their own. I would like to listen to a story here. Gajendra. Gajendra is an elephant who's big, strong, has a whole harem of female elephants, and they enter into a beautiful lake. And as they are playing around, a crocodile comes and catches his feet. And for yugas, they struggle. And slowly, over a period of time, the water is the element of the crocodile. So he's going to win overall. Ultimately, keeps slowly pulling the elephant into the water. The female elephants have all left, and Gajendra now lifts a small lotus, holds it up, and says, I surrender.
Hmm.
Come and rescue me.
Hmm.
And the Lord manifests in an Ashtabhuja form, riding on Garuda, and uses his Sudarshan Chakra to chop off the head of the Makara, the crocodile. Such a person, Sri Krishna describes as Arti. He has a lot of trouble, but he realizes that his trouble can't be overcome by his own efforts. And he says, I surrender, right? I need help. The second one, the second type of person who will also cross over this barrier, this barrier created by these three gunas, is the Arthi, a person who's looking for material benefits.
Yes.
Another example here is a young chap, 5-year-old, and he just took 3 days. His name is Dhruva.
Of course, we know that story.
Right? And what did he do? When the Lord manifested, he also didn't say, give me moksha. He said, I want to go and sit on my father's lap. He still had that, right? That smallness of that ego that we hold on to. He still had that. But he said, I can't do it on my own. When that concept of thought of saying, I can't do it on my own happens, the ego starts dissolving. That's when we have the ability to go beyond these three gunas.
And ask.
And there's the third. The third type, he says, Jignasu, the curious. The guy who's curious about knowing that this life can't be, oh, I was born and I died. There has to be something beyond. Such a person, an example is Raja Janak. And the fourth, he says, is the Jnani. And Krishna very clearly says, the Jnani is the most dear to me, because he says, and he understands, he doesn't experience it, but he understands that he and I are the same. And therefore he works towards this. He diligently works towards this. And he therefore learns to accept. Again, such a beautiful attitude that Sri Krishna brings forth for us. He says, Titiksha. He told Arjun way back in chapter 2, Titiksha.
We spoke about the
Yes.
Diksha then.
Samir, I'm guessing as we move further into chapter 8 is when we will start exploring how this plays out. How do these four kind of people actually begin to embrace that, understand that, accept that, become that. But for now, this chapter 7 on the Jnana Vijnana Yoga was so powerful and both thought-provoking at one end and mind-blowing at the other end, when it says that the entire universe, the consciousness, is basically about the 5 elements, about the 3 elements that make us. So the 5 elements of air, earth, water, space and fire. The 3 elements which come from within us, the physical body. Actually, the body is made up of the elements. So it will be the mind, the emotions, the manas, the intellect, and that I, that little ahamkar, the little I, the ego that we carry. And 8 of these interweaving with the 3 guna of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas is what the entire universe is. And the fact that, and I think we will need to go further deeper, is we explore the concept as we leave you behind with the thought of I am in them, but they are not in us. And that thought of understanding that I am putting myself in that anger is not in me. I am the screen that reflects what is being projected. And therefore, move into that space of understanding, learning, embracing, accepting, and becoming one with the that, which is about the 4 ways you can't. You can't do it if you're ignorant, you can't. It will just not happen. Then you will stay within your little I, your big I, your body, I, me, myself, and never be able to expand your consciousness to become one with the cosmos, to become one with the. And therefore, Bhagwan Sri Krishna also tells us about the 4 ways that you will certainly not begin to embrace the Tat or become one with it or even begin to comprehend, which is the people who are ignorant, people who are lazy, people who are delusional, and people who hold their arrogance so close to their heart that they can't let go of it. But then, Bhagwan Sri Krishna will also tell you what will get you there, who will understand and embrace their own vast consciousness and become one with it. Are the 4 people that are Arati, troubled, Arathi, very specific, and seek the consciousness even if it is for material gains. The Vignasu, so the person who's curious. And I remember we had spoken, Samir, about the kinds of questions they are. We'll probably come back to it later as well. So, what are the questions you're asking? Are they curiosity questions, confirmatory questions, or clarificatory questions? Bhagwan Sri Krishna says it is the ones who ask curiosity questions, who really want to know. And then there's the Jnana, who already accepts it, and therefore Bhagwan Sri Krishna says, he and I are one. That he already is. I am. With this, we will then step into chapter 8 the next time that we meet, where we will explore further how to explore, understand, embrace, comprehend, and become Tattva. Namaskar and welcome again to the Eikam series of Gita On The Go.
इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे ज्ञानविज्ञानयोगो नाम 7मोऽध्यायः। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरिः ॐ। श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ॐ।
Na 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 na